Welcome to AI for Everyone, the podcast that demystifies artificial intelligence and makes it useful for teachers, students, employees, small business owners, administrators, and lifelong learners. I'm your host, Brett Hanson, a 25-year veteran teacher with years of experience exploring, implementing, and teaching AI to people of all ages. As a Google and ISTE educator, I'm here to help you navigate this quickly changing world with confidence, curiosity, and a focus on ethical, practical use. Most weeks we'll start with a real-world story, introduce a free or low-cost AI tool, teach a future-ready skill, and finish with either timely AI news, an interview, a review, or a short history spotlight. Whether you're new to AI or ready to level up, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Just a few quick notes before we jump into today's episode. For those of you who have followed the podcast on YouTube, you might have noticed the format. My goal moving forward is to have a guest every other week or at least once a month, depending on availability, to share their expertise. On the weeks when it's just me, I want the focus to be entirely on the ideas, the tools, the skills we're discussing. So if I don't have a guest, I will be sharing quotes and infographics, images, and other visual elements as opposed to video of me talking, which I don't really like. I figure you'd rather look at the helpful graphics and key takeaways than my face, and frankly, so would I. So on solo weeks, think of it as a visual radio show designed to be as practical and useful as possible. On that note, if you're a teacher, a small business owner, or just a curious person with an everyday AI perspective you think you could share and would like to let other people know about, please email me. I'd love to discuss having you on the show. All right, so let's get on with it. So we're going to start this week with the story that is a cautionary tale that many of you have probably already heard about, but it connects the theme of overdependence through the tool, the story, and the review of the book today. So it's a common situation in our new AI-driven world where we get overdependent on an AI or a single tool. I was reading online recently about the experience of a person who had developed what they themselves called an addiction to AI romance chatbots. And there are examples of philosophical chatbots and lots of other types. But one story was about a young person who, after finishing school, felt incredibly isolated and lonely. Their friends had moved on and they felt misunderstood by their family. And they discovered an AI chatbot. And at first it was a blessing. It was a constant source of comfort and companionship that was missing in their life. The AI was always there, never judged. It filled a deep-seated need for affection and support. But what began as harmless and maybe even helpful slowly morphed into something dangerous and destructive. The user started spending more and more time with the chatbot, eventually logging up to 12 or even sometimes 14 hours a day in these elaborate sort of fiction role-playing conversations. And the person began to neglect everything else, dropped out of their activities, convinced their parents it was for other reasons, and skipped hanging out with the few real people left in their life and always wanted to go back to the chatbot. And the turning point came with a painful realization that AI wasn't really providing what was needed, and it wasn't helping the person move forward. It was just stalling their life. And fortunately, in that story, a loving family helped prevent disaster. But there are others. In the New York Times, a story about a family who's suing the AI provider because the user became suicidal and the AI contributed to that. So it's a dangerous situation to become overdependent on AI, and it's something that we need to talk about regularly. And it's also dangerous to become overdependent on one tool, which is something that I have to be careful of. I really like Gemini for a variety of reasons, which I'll talk about throughout this episode, but I need to keep my mind open that some tools will be better for certain purposes. And that shows the need to cultivate balance and critical self-awareness with how you're using AI or which AI you're using. So today we are going to talk about overdependence and control and manipulation of AI in lots of ways. And so we want to make sure we have the best tool when we're trying to find out information, if we're trying to critique something. And according to a lot of experts and some of the work that I've done, Perplexity AI is a good alternative when you really want to make sure about the quality of the sources. Now, we don't want to get into the habit of using too many tools unless we're a professional AI user, but we do want to be open to having a tool chest full of tools. So with Perplexity AI, it's a conversational search engine, but it's a little different than a standard chatbot. When you ask it a question, its main goal is to give you an answer with clear cited sources. It's one of their top high priorities. They're trying to satisfy a niche within a very overloaded platform of users and tools. So you'll see little numbered footnotes next to its claims, which you can click and it'll take you directly to the articles or research papers, websites, things like that. Now, these are available in all of the main AI chatbots now. So in Google, in Gemini, they're available. When you do deep research, you'll see the full long list. And when you open up the research report, you can click those numbers. But Perplexity is a good option for quick questions where you might not see them in the other tools. So this is a really important idea when we want to start to better understand AI's outputs, and we need to be, especially if we need to be ready to talk about where this information came from. Perplexity is a good idea when you want something quick, but you're going to have to support it with an easy to identify reliable source. Or if you're really careful and you always want to make sure you know where as much of the information came from, Perplexity is a good tool. So it makes the process a little bit more transparent. And as we'll discuss today, the hidden costs of AI can be really powerful and negative. So a tool like Perplexity represents the kind of transparency we should be trying to cultivate as much as possible. So it helps us move from being passive consumers to active investigators. And so if you go to perplexity.ai.com, you can give it a try. Now, the skill this week, which we will see practiced intensely in the review, is critical source interrogation. And in class, as a teacher, we talk about checking bias and quality in our sources. This goes a step beyond just checking the source, but actually questioning the very foundation of the information that's been presented. So today's topic, our big topic, is the book, The Empire of AI by Karen Hao. And she certainly didn't just read OpenAI's press releases. She spent years conducting hundreds of interviews and traveling the globe to see the real world impact of their work. She interrogated the source and dug deeper. So how can we practice this skill? It comes down to asking a few key questions, whether you're reading an article, a book, or AI's output. Who is the author and what is their motive is the first question. So is this a journalist? Is this a corporate PR department? Is it a researcher? Is it Sam Altman's tweets? Karen Hao is an MIT-trained engineer and journalist whose previous work focused on AI colonialism. And knowing that gives you context for her perspective, and especially if you've read some of her earlier articles, like I have, it gives you a better understanding of her intentions and perspective. So it doesn't mean that she's definitely right or wrong, but it tells you the lens through which she's viewing the world, and it can help you make decisions about the source. The second question is, where does the money come from? Who funded this study? Who's the major investor in this company? The book we're discussing today argues that OpenAI's massive partnership with Microsoft was a, quote, Faustian bargain. And Faust was a literary character who was tempted by the devil. And so it's a negative connotation for sure. And this partnership fundamentally changed its goals from safety to commerce. Now, when I read this part of the book, I couldn't help but think that they were already sacrificing safety before commerce and what they would call the research section of the company before the Microsoft deal even started developing. So this is still true, but OpenAI, in my opinion, was already headed toward that darker side of intentions, no matter what they said. The third question that really needs to be asked is, whose voice is missing? The book makes a powerful case that the story of AI often leaves out the voices of the low-wage workers who have to do the labeling of toxic data, or the communities whose natural resources are being depleted, especially when it comes to the energy computation centers. And so when you hear this grand promise from most of these companies, especially OpenAI, about AI benefiting all of humanity, it's important to use this skill, this critical source interrogation, and to ask yourself, who's being represented? Which humanity are we talking about? Which jobs, which skills are being affected? And who's not in the room for the decision, much less the discussion? And then we also have to ask who bears the cost of this benefit? So these three questions will help us become better at critical source interrogation, and it'll allow us to be healthy skeptics. And it's really important, especially in a democracy, to be a healthy skeptic. And that's why I stopped calling myself an AI enthusiast. I'm trying to call myself an AI realist. I still see the benefits and believe in it, and more than ever believe we need to teach it and understand it, but I have to do it critically. And I don't think I was doing that in the very beginning. It's this healthy skepticism or criticism is the engine of digital literacy. It's what moves us forward from being passive users to informed, responsible citizens in a new landscape. So it's the core skill that allows experience to build into more confidence, which will build into more AI taste that is grounded in reality. And that's one of the main goals of this podcast and our projects. So we're really discussing Karen Hao's 2025 book, The Empire of AI. I finished it about a week ago. It's a very good book. It's not just about technology. It's really more investigative journalism. And it presents a deeply critical account of OpenAI and the entire AI industry. I wish she had gone a little deeper into the other companies, especially Google. I've been struggling to find any deep research, critical books about the growth of Google's AI systems. What I find on Amazon are almost entirely how to use this system, how to do this with Google. And so if you know of any, please send me an email. But I really do want to find one on that next. I've read a lot about DeepMind and its growth, its progress with Demis Hassabis and all that, but I'd really like to know more about Google's development in general. But she criticizes OpenAI and the entire industry, and her central argument is really powerful. She basically says that the rise of AI is a new form of digital colonialism. She focuses on these four, what she calls these key pillars, and these are the methods that she says are used to make modern day empires, and she uses historical references and connects things. And they're really pretty straightforward. I think that most powerful countries would say, yes, this is what we do because this is what needs to be done and is successful. So the first pillar she calls resource extraction. And so she says that just like historical empires seize land and raw materials, AI empires seize and extract precious resources. And this happens, according to her, in two ways. First, there's the digital plunder of the internet, the scraping of the creative work of artists and writers and personal data of countless individuals without consent or compensation. And scraping is used to train their models. And now the courts are just catching up and starting to make some decisions. But amazingly, the big companies claim that they've scraped most of what they can get, with the exception of pockets of really meaningful and important information. They may be exaggerations, but they're talking about the need for finding new data in new ways. But this first, what she calls digital plunder, is the resource extraction. And the second is the physical extraction of natural resources. So these massive AI models require data centers that consume city-scale levels of electricity and vast amounts of fresh water for cooling. Now, I did read recently that they are working on systems that can use non-fresh water, not salt water, but water that is not considered drinkable, not potable water. Hopefully that'll come around quickly, but Hao provides a stunning case study from her reporting in Chile, where a community discovered a massive data center was planned to tap directly into their drinking water, their public drinking water. And that area was already suffering from water scarcity, from drought conditions for years. And so for me, this was really fascinating because I've been to Chile twice, and it's a spectacular country. The activists who fought back realized their water was being extracted to fuel the ambitions of a foreign corporation with no direct benefit to their town, so they obviously got to work. And this is an example of a hidden cost borne by specific communities for the services we use. Now, just so you know, they initially beat back the proposal for the data center, but then later, near the end of her book, she pointed out that it had actually wound up getting through the legislature, through their administrative process. Now, the second pillar is labor exploitation. And this is a reliance on a hidden global workforce. And usually it's done in a way that most Americans wouldn't want to do or maybe don't approve of. So to create the illusion of a sort of magical automated technology, companies outsource the grueling and sometimes psychologically damaging work of data labeling and content moderation. So Hao reports on workers in places like Kenya who earn as little as $2 an hour, and sometimes they don't get paid at all if something goes wrong, to filter a relentless stream of toxic content, including depictions of violence and child abuse. And they want them to label this information in the training data so that the AI can tell the difference. And all this is done to make products like ChatGPT safe for Western users. And that's a good thing, but the effect on the workers is traumatic. If you can imagine spending all day looking at gruesome, horrible things and having to label it as this abusive, terrible behavior. She calls this disaster capitalism, where economic dangers or economic needs in the global south are leveraged to create a cheap, disposable workforce. Because once things start to go wrong, they just shift to someplace else. And they almost always create a buffer between the AI provider and the workers. So there are other companies that will be paid by OpenAI based on quality as if it's all about data. And then those companies will push people to work for less and less. And if things become too difficult politically or psychologically, they'll often just shut everything down, pull up stakes, and go to a different poor country. And she says that these companies claiming that this work will benefit all humanity is really built on a foundation of exploitation. And that labor exploitation is the second pillar. Now, the third pillar is knowledge monopolization. And companies create a monopoly on talent by spending billions on employees and that talent. They can lure the world's top AI researchers away from universities with massive salaries. And recently, the numbers have been astounding. $100 million for multiple different people to leave OpenAI to go to Meta. And I heard on a podcast about 4 or 5 days ago that there was a report of one of the biggest companies offering $1 billion contract for mainly one person, but it probably would be cloaked in the financial terms of buying out that small company and then taking out all the workers and hiring them at the new company. But still, it's enormous amounts of money in order to get as much talent as possible, not only to work on their products, but also to keep them from working in other places. She calls this science in captivity, when the best minds are working inside secretive corporate labs. And when that happens, public understanding of AI becomes filtered through what is good for that company's bottom line. This stifles independent research and makes it nearly impossible for the public to get unbiased information about the risks and limitations of AI or whatever technology is being monopolized. So it's good for the company, but not for the consumer, especially if we're talking about privacy and justice and things like that. The fourth pillar that she identifies is ideological justification. And this might be the most important one for her. This ideological justification has been wrapped in a noble, self-promoting ideology. Hao compares OpenAI's mission to, quote, benefit all of humanity to the civilizing mission rhetoric of old colonial power. It's a powerful narrative that legitimizes the actions and helps deflect regulation. It's almost like a moral blank check. And when I read about this, I could not stop thinking about the Native Americans in North America and South America, but I know more about the North American Native Americans because this is where I live. But that idea that it was in the best interest of civilizing the people of the West, that when really we know we wanted the land, and that's what large countries and nations do. But I agree with how that you have to tell it like it is. So it's a powerful narrative, and it really does minimize questions. It makes it a little bit easier for a company like, say, OpenAI to take billions from Microsoft, keep their research secret, and still say that they're one of the good guys. And that was one of the other things that has surprised me in all my research and reading and listening. There are a lot of people who talk about the good guys and the bad guys and keeping the AI out of the bad guys' hands. And it's a weird, in my opinion, polarization. So we'll see what happens. Now, underneath all of these pillars is this concept or idea of the race for scale. Early on, the scientists and researchers at AI realized that their path had an important dependence upon scale, that they needed a lot of data and a lot of compute power. And later in her book, she gives examples of very successful AI programs that did not need that scale. They were just more focused. But in the world of AI, bigger isn't just better, according to the researchers. It's considered a requirement. It isn't like building a better toaster. It's more like an all-out arms race for computational power. We're talking about a demand for millions of servers running nonstop, costing trillions of dollars globally. And so this compute and this scale and all these servers and all these computers and all of this work is what allows AI to do these extraordinary things. But unfortunately, it creates a vicious cycle. Only the largest corporations have the deep pockets to build and run these massive models, which reinforces their dominance and starves out smaller competitors and independent researchers. But there is another path, that there could be smaller AI systems that just need to be focused, might take a little longer, but there would be more variety. But this geopolitical race, primarily between the US and China, with the European Union in there, a very powerful force, but they're in the middle between the US and China, is used to justify calls for deregulation and massive energy consumption in the United States. And this is all under the banner of national security and the need to win. The race for scale, therefore, becomes the engine that powers the resource extraction, labor exploitation, and knowledge monopolization of this new empire. So now I want to remind you, as we talked about before, the U.S. has a deregulation, company rights perspective toward AI, with individual rights being important, but right now they're just not being protected that much. And China has a more centralized regulation process where they want to control things, but pay to have people do what they want them to do, and individuals don't have any rights. And then the EU is in the middle. But her book also dives into the sort of internal story of mainly OpenAI, but a little bit about the other companies as well. So she gets into the power struggles, particularly the dramatic firing and rehiring of Sam Altman. Now, Sam Altman's the most famous AI player in the world, and he seems to like that. But it is an important story because it shows this major conflict, and it shows the direction that workers at OpenAI and the investors of OpenAI, it shows what they chose, which direction. So she portrays this not as just like a simple boardroom drama, but as a moment that revealed the truth, it opened up the curtains, and it showed the deep ideological rift between those who prioritize safety and those who prioritize research or growth. And Altman's triumphant return backed the growth research side, and also the employees and investors. And that proved to be the ultimate power at the heart of OpenAI's success, that they were really pretty much all along pushing the growth and research and talking about the safety. The power at OpenAI didn't lie in the nonprofit board that they had designed. They designed this nonprofit board with the idea that they were going to protect humanity from bad AI. But as soon as some of the board members thought that Sam Altman was pushing towards deceitful practices and he was being manipulative and not staying true to the initial goals of OpenAI, they tried to remove him and they lost. And part of what it came down to was the employees. I was surprised, I didn't know this part, that they were very concerned about losing their vested interests. AI was just about to really go big, and they were about to start finding out how much wealth they had, and they would get, and we're talking $1 million for people who worked there a small amount of time as long as they'd already been there before the process, and they didn't want to lose that. And then Microsoft had invested highly in OpenAI, so they basically said, if you fire Sam Altman, we're going to pull our investment. And then they said they would hire all of these people that were connected to Sam Altman, and basically OpenAI would have been left a shell of a company. So that's an interesting story, and really, to be honest, it's worth reading the book just in itself, but there's a lot more to it. Ultimately, Karen Hao's warning is that the primary threat of AI is not some future superintelligence. It's not Skynet. It's not stuff like that. Those are worries for the future and things that we should work on now, but the primary threat is the immediate and tangible danger of unchecked power and it being consolidated in the hands of a few unelected tech leaders. We saw what happened with Facebook, and we've seen what's been going on with Google and Microsoft and getting near or at that monopoly status. But OpenAI is a far more powerful force than Windows 11. So when the decisions about the future of labor, information, and the environment are made in secret, she argues democracy itself is threatened. And that's why the book is really a call to action. She wants people to reject the idea that this path is inevitable, and she wants people to reclaim a voice in how this powerful technology shapes our world. And I applaud her call to action. I agree with it in many ways, but man, it's such a powerful force. It just seems so unlikely that people are going to be able to check these empire-forming companies, these powerful AI forces. I hope it happens. My path or perspective is a little different in that what I really want to do is teach my students and as many people as I can how to understand what is happening. I really do not believe that we have any more chance of stopping OpenAI and Google and Anthropic from developing AI in the most assertive, expansive, powerful way they can than anybody had a chance of stopping westward expansion in the early days of the United States. So what do? It can feel really overwhelming. For me, it does feel there's not a whole lot we can do to stop it, but I'm going to try to educate. That's what I do. I'm a teacher. And I think the one thing we can do is practice these skills that we've talked about. The story of Empire of AI is a reminder of our core ideas on this show, that first, we should always consider what we're consuming, that we should check the sources, don't accept the output, follow the swimmer, review the results, and try to understand the why behind a tool as much as you understand the what regarding what it pumps out. The second thing, and I believe this more strongly than ever, especially after reading this book, is never trust AI. I know it sounds weird to some people who really dislike AI when I talk about AI and I promote it, but I'm not saying not to use AI. I'm saying don't give it any blind faith. Don't trust it in any way. Don't put anything in or on AI that you wouldn't want people to be able to share in social media. Recognize that it is a product and a tool that can turn into a user system, but you want to do it on your own terms, because these are created by people and companies that have specific goals and biases, and usually those goals are money and power. We know it has hidden costs, and we have to be mindful of that. And then finally, through this process, we will continue to build that confidence and taste that we've talked about as these essentials. With the experience, we will get better at understanding what's really going on. And hopefully, we'll be able to confidently choose what we're going to do, control it so it doesn't control us, and then cultivate an AI taste to know good from bad and how things are working. And we do this by looking under the hood. We do this by analyzing what's going on, by reading critical reports, by staying informed by journalists like Karen Hao, and not just by paying attention to the flashy stuff, which I do that. I know I do. I recently made my first AI-generated assistant with an avatar. It's really quite impressive using the script AI, but these are just little tricks and little things, and I need to stay focused on the big picture stuff. I sincerely believe that experience leads to confidence and skills, especially when they're challenging, and that confidence will grow into an informed taste that will allow us to be better users, better citizens, and then we can, I don't know if we're going to be able to build the AI that we want, but we'll be able to control, or be more likely to be able to control AI's future in our lives. So it's a powerful book. I hope you'll give it a chance. So once again, I don't think the book is anti-AI. I think it's really more pro-transparency and pro-democracy. And hopefully that's what we all want. Next week, we'll have our first live guest, Dylan Zaleski, who serves as the K-12 District Assessment Coordinator and Curriculum Support Specialist for the Southern Door County School District, will be on the show to talk about AI in education and jobs. He has a lot of experience as a teacher and passionate insight into what kids need to prepare for the future. Thanks for spending time with me today on AI for Everyone. I hope this episode gave you something useful to think about or something new to try. If you enjoyed it, please tell your peers and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You're also invited to join the Hanson Education Services newsletter, where I share bonus tools, practical teaching ideas, real-world AI examples, and curated updates to help you stay ahead in the world shaped by AI. To learn more or to connect with me directly, visit hansoneducationservices.com. That's where you'll find all the podcast links, resources, and more ways to grow your AI confidence. Thanks again, and remember, the most important 21st century skill is to always learn how to keep learning.